Well, I think the whole fulcrum of wokeism, as it permeated the corporate boardroom, is almost is this one act that went down. And Jamie Dimon is a man I have a lot of respect for. I've covered him for years. I joke with him when I saw him not too long ago. I said, we've known each other when neither of us had gray hair, which is very true. I followed his career. It's an amazing career, and he's a smart guy. But I think he did something bad here. And, I think it's something that was hurtful to corporate America. It's hurtful to the country, quite frankly. Because when he was running the business roundtable, he basically said, listen, we are we are citizens of the world, which sounds great, by the way. We are going to, instead of our main mission to be the Milton Friedman approach of capitalism, which is you do stuff to enhance shareholder value within the bounds of ethics and legality. Milton Friedman was clear when he made that statement. That was the sort of founding principles of corporate governance for many years until this time where the business roundtable said, no, now it's stakeholder capitalism. And we are citizens of the world. We believe in, we're going to try to make the environment a better place. We're going to try to lift people out of poverty. That's going to be a goal, not a sort of, how can I put it, a follow through from our efforts of employing people and creating big companies that are prosperous.
Right.
And when he did that, it did open the door very, very wide to all the stuff that you saw after that. The DEI craze that swept corporate America, where corporate America engaged in quotas, which, no offense, is illegal. It was probably illegal even before the Supreme Court ruled on affirmative action in college admissions, which is a pretty sweeping rule. It does affect what goes on in corporations if you read it. But it was probably illegal before that. That ESG, it opened the doors to massive ESG, like literally that this whole notion that corporations had to force, or money managers had to force oil companies to seek alternative fuel sources as opposed to drilling, essentially, was mandatory. And who cares about the consequences? Which the consequences were when it reached its peak, higher gas prices and massive inflation. And I could go on and on. And how these CEOs became sort of political arms of the left after George Floyd. You go through the list of what these companies did, what they said, how they essentially gave cover to the leftist view that America is a bastion of white supremacy. They've said it. I mean, I quote, I make the quotes. The quotes are all there. You can just read yourself.
I want to get into, you brought up with ESG and how the people who got hurt by the investment strategies that were being used are the middle class, the you, me, the average investor.
The working class.
Right, exactly. First, I got to shout out, we got 400 viewers watching live on X, and I want to remind everybody, we've dropped a link. You get to ask Charlie whatever you want to ask Charlie. We are screening a little bit, but Charlie can handle himself. I mean, the guy, you box, don't you? Are you a boxer? You used to be a boxer. Okay.
I mean, listen, when I was a kid, I fought a lot. I fought for a guy named Jack Malanafi, who's unfortunately Marsh Haddad. Jack's no longer with us, but I did it through high school, and I still hit the heavy bag.
Yeah, okay. Well, we want to let people ask you questions because you've got a 30-plus year, close to 30-plus year career covering Wall Street. And you and I have both lived, as have many of the people watching, lived through the ups and downs and the craziness of Wall Street. And I want to get into the book and why you chose this topic. But let's go back a little bit because it's the sellout. And what I think... When people think of you, and we've just had a very robust endorsement of capitalism, I think you and I would agree it is the best solution to so many problems. And it has problems, don't get me wrong, but hey, it's so much better than the alternative. But the title of the book that you won the Wall Street Journal called the best business book of 2009, The Sellout, was it 3 decades, how Wall Street greed and government mismanagement destroyed the global financial system. Have we learned anything? Has Wall Street learned anything since you wrote that book?
Yes. I mean, Wall Street is, listen, Wall Street is very reactive. I think one of the sort of issues I think that I bring up in Go Woke, Go Broke, and the same thing with the sellout, is that why did Wall Street underwrite all those bonds that were packed with all those mortgages that were sold to people who couldn't afford to pay them, and why did they keep them on their balance sheet as they were imploding, and that in turn basically blew up all the banks. And by the way, you can't have an economy if you have no banks, right?
Hello.
I mean,
Well, I remember this. I mean, I was in Washington during the vote on TARP and the first time the Congress said no.
I actually broke the TARP story.
Well, you broke the AIG bailout.
I did that too. But I remember I was on with Maria Bartiromo, and I was on CNBC, and I broke the TARP story. I did it. I had Steve Leisman was in one screen. I was in one. And we kind of unrolled this thing about what they were planning, which was essentially, this new massive bailout, and how my sources were on Wall Street telling me this. And I cautioned everybody, said, I don't have all the details. Remember, I'm reporting this. This is going to bail out Wall Street. And so it's a positive for Wall Street. So be careful. I do not have this from the government just yet. I got it from people that were talking with Hank Paulson, who was then the former Goldman Sachs CEO, was then the Treasury Secretary for George Bush. And the market, within a minute of me saying that, the market went up 500 points. It literally popped 500 points. And I remember Maria being on the floor saying, the market has literally just popped 500 points. And so why did Wall Street do stuff that nearly destroyed it and destroyed the economy?
Greed.
Well, yes, there was a greed aspect that I talk about, but it was also incentivized to do it by the government.
I think a lot of people got burned and never got made whole from it.
Yeah, I mean, but what I was really the point I'm trying to make is that Wall Street reacts to incentives. There were government incentives that made them do really stupid things that led to the 2008 financial crisis. We could do a deep dive into that. And those incentives included, the government forcing banks to do subprime loans because the homeowner at that point,
Oh, boy. That feedback. You got your computer still on? Maybe that's the feedback situation.
Shut that off.
Yeah.
Okay.
So keep going. Well, you were talking about subprime mortgages. There were a bunch of hearings. And the people who, the Community Reinvestment Act is what you're talking about, CRA, they would tell you that didn't lead to it. So what would you say to them?
They would tell you that. There was never one reason why anything happened. And I'm not talking about the Community Reinvestment Act here. That's a piece of it. The other piece of it was literally the government telling banks to make more subprime loans. Fannie and Freddie, the two government-sponsored enterprises that are, half government, but they're publicly traded stocks, were sort of incentivizing the banks to do subprime loans because they were buying them off their balance sheet because the government wanted home ownership as a right as opposed to something you have to put 20% down and buy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That you long term. So those were the incentives that forced banks to do stupid things that led to the financial crisis. And here's my point: there were government incentives that were part and parcel of why companies went so woke. And it was it began largely with the Obama administration forcing, adopting a Green New Deal type ethos where it was prodding companies to build windmills and do things of that nature, using its civil rights arm of the Justice Department to impose DEI on companies. And so there were a lot of incentivizing, some would say bullying, of companies to go woke. Again, there's never one reason why something happens. The companies saw some profits, particularly the big money managers.
Well, let me quote you from your book, because you're talking about woke, and I think people would take issue with this, but this jumped out to me when I was reading the book. And what you write is, as pillars of the American establishment went, quote, woke, the sometimes overused term that so perfectly describes the progressive groupthink that seeks to remake the country and its culture into a left-wing hellhole, being Southern, white, and conservative makes you a triple threat to mankind, even at a business dinner.
Right. Well, you have to get the context of that. What
Okay.
happened was, context was that at Goldman Sachs, these young deal associates were thinking about work. They had to work late on a deal, and they wanted to get food. And somebody suggested, because kids like Chick-fil-A,
Right.
that, and then about two or three people chimed in and says, no, Chick-fil-A is run by these guys, the Cathy family, who are Southern Baptists and fundamentalists and anti-gay, and then the argument ensued, and then I guess they decided not to eat Chick-fil-A. Maybe they went to something more culturally appropriate like Chinese food. I have no idea, but that was the backdrop of that. That the Wall Street ethos, even and by the way, both at the top and the bottom. Obviously, that's at the bottom rung. That's at the associate level, but the CEOs engage in the same sort of discussions, different ways. They do it at Davos. They did it after George Floyd. They did it during our Summer of Love, and it kind of permeates the entire firm. The question is, how do we get there? And that's kind of what the book tried to narratively explain.
And you explained the Goldman Sachs Chick-fil-A thing. You explained very well that the family behind Chick-fil-A was perhaps mischaracterized in some respects. You get into this in the book. I want to ask you this question, though. What does it say about a Jamie Dimon or a Larry Fink, the different people in the C-suite? If one day they're woke and then the next day they're not, and then they go back. I mean, they go back and forth. It seems to me that there's a character issue there. And Jamie Dimon is praised by so many people for the genius he is. But what does it say when you go back and forth the way he has?
Yeah, I mean, listen, these are businessmen, right? They like making money, and they like preserving their jobs and their institutions. And I guess the best you could say about that is that they have no moral guideposts, or their moral guideposts are few and far between. But they are worth billions for a reason. And
yeah. Well, he just said he made, $39 million last year. And listen, he earned every penny. But he also made the comment about how tariffs wouldn't, there'll be some inflation, but it won't hurt that much. Won't hurt him. But, you're making $65,000, $70,000 a year. It's going to hurt you.
By the way, why is he worth every penny of that? Listen, what's fascinating about this is that, Jamie Dimon runs a too big to fail bank.
Yes.
He still supports DEI. And I had this conversation with one of his people. He's like, if DEI is so bad, why are we embracing it and we're the most successful bank? And I said, listen, you operate a racket. You are too big to fail, means you borrow cheaply and you can lend at a higher rate. It's guaranteed money. As much as I like Jamie, he ain't that smart. He's not creating the next, he's not putting men on the moon like Elon Musk. No offense. He does he's a good banker, but he does play within a rigged game.
Well, let's talk about the rigged game. Because when I was at Fox and I covered Madoff, and I interviewed Madoff in jail. It never got the light of day, but Picard, the trustee, the bankruptcy trustee, filed against JP Morgan Chase. And it was thrown out of court on standing, not on merit. And in that filing, they talked about how JP Morgan Chase people, I'm not saying Dimon, but people at Chase knew Madoff was a Ponzi scheme. They were going to sell product to their clients, but went from $1 billion to $250 million because Madoff was trouble. And he was kiting checks through JP Morgan Chase for years. Where I'm going with this is JP Morgan Chase paid a $3 billion fine. I mean, it's the cost of doing business, but they didn't have to say they did anything wrong, and they paid $3 billion. Is that what you're getting at with Jamie?
Right. Yeah, and I wouldn't say lay it at Jamie's feet because he's the CEO. That doesn't mean he does everything, right? He doesn't handle he never met Madoff, and there's no evidence he said. No. And there's no evidence he did. I did cover a lot of that, including the notion that people were warning their supervisors about Madoff at the time. There was a degree of warning, and they still their explanation is that, well, we're a highly regulated bank. He got out of jail. He's you can't just cancel his account because he's done nothing wrong. And although they sure do cancel conservative accounts, so we've been learning much more about this lately as Donald Trump brought it up, the president. But that was their excuse, and it bit him in the ass, obviously. And again, these are big, unwieldy, sort of bureaucracies. And sometimes you don't know, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. I think a lot of that occurred during the financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
The woke thing was different. There was almost a directive from the top. You know what I'm saying?